Welcome to part 2 of my series on the Salem witch trials. Hello, I'm ME from ME and History. Before we resume our journey, I must remind you of the concoction of factors stewing in your metaphorical cauldrons from part 1. It is in this video that I will break out the last and most important factor: the beliefs of or about witchcraft. When you think of witchcraft, what comes to mind? A cackling woman threatening a girl and her pet? An old lady living in a hut on poultry's legs? 3 hags chanting in Shakespearean English? 14 people on broomsticks playing a sport with 4 balls? Yes, witchcraft is involved in these and several other examples, but we now know it to be a spooky, yet often fun-filled, figment of our imaginations. But during 14th to 17th century Europe, witchcraft wasn't seen that way, courtesy of an event called the Little Ice Age. During this time, winters became longer and colder, which led to failed harvests and rampant disease. The Little Ice Age, combined with a hefty list of other events, the Reformation, a changing social order, etc., made Europe a rather topsy-turvy place to be in. Like today, people wanted answers about why things weren't normal enough. With the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment yet to arrive, magic was seen as the key to unlocking the world's mysteries. And because this was a time of duality, i.e., God versus Satan, magic itself was split into 2 categories: white magic, spells, potions, or objects used for healing, protection, good luck, etc., and black magic, or what some of you viewers would probably term the dark arts. Because things weren't exactly rosy, people believed that the latter was being practiced. The result? Witch hunts galore. But just how did people determine who was a witch? Well, along with books about the occult, so too were there books about witchcraft, the most infamous being the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. Published by Heinrich Kramer in the 1400s, the Malleus Maleficarum was essentially a guidebook. Included in it were instructions on how to look for evidence of a pact with Satan, such as physical imperfections or having a pet hanging around the house, what kinds of tests and torture techniques to use, which resulted in often untrue confessions, and how to kill suspected witches. Hanging or burning at the stake were the most common, depending on where you lived. With the basics of witchcraft now covered, we need to slowly pour it into our metaphorical cauldrons and watch it closely react to our concoction as our journey continues. We'll begin by the location of the event's epicenter, the home of the close-minded, resentful minister Samuel Parris. In January 1692, Parris's 9-year-old daughter Betty and 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams started behaving in ways that were totally out of place for a normal girl in a strict, isolated Puritan settlement. Barking like dogs, complaining of being pricked by pins, etc. Naturally, a doctor was summoned to examine the girls. Finding no physical ailments, the doctor diagnosed the girls as being bewitched. Not long after this happened, two more girls, 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard and 12-year-old Ann Putnam Jr., started to behave in a similar fashion. Within days, more and more girls showed symptoms that weren't normal. It is the last name of the fourth girl that should be catching your attention, my viewers. Why? Let's go back in time, shall we? Remember the festering tensions between Salem town and Salem village? How about the feuding between Salem village's most prominent families? And what about the family that put Samuel Parris on that pulpit? Something smells fishy. You see, the rising tide of afflicted girls was a kind of ripple effect caused by the situations these girls were under. Smack dab in the center, we have Betty Parris and Abigail Williams. Given that they lived in the house of a narrow-minded man who talked about Satan and his minions at the dinner table nonstop, these two girls were under serious pressure to be the image of the perfect, normal girl in an isolated Puritan society, being submissive to authority figures, dressing modestly, etc. Such pressure can make a person stressed out. But because they were under the thumb and roof of a conservative minister, there were only 3 options available to them. 1, keep up appearances. 2, escape. Or 3, act out. For obvious reasons, the first 2 weren't the best choices, so that left option 3. As you can imagine, their behavior certainly put them in the spotlight. Once these 2 girls removed the cork from the bottle containing their stress, its effects spread outward. After the starting point, the next ripple was made up of girls who were related to or came from families that supported the Putnams. When looking at these girls, it's important to remember that they were also under pressure to be normal. Hearing about Betty and Abigail's behavior, these girls saw an outlet for their stress. So what did they do? Act out. That's what. The third ripple consisted of girls who were servants and or orphans, some of them being refugees or escaped captives from the wars with the Native Americans and their French allies. The prospects of these girls were rather dim because they had no connections within Salem village and lacked the proper dowry that was necessary for a good marriage. Some of them may have remembered the horrors of the wars and suffered from sleep paralysis or PTSD as a result. Some of them may have been abused within the homes they lived and worked in. The acting out of these girls was a way to make people wake up and pay attention to them. The girls within the fourth and final ripple were not suffering at all. They were most likely related to the Porters or their allies. Seeing the hysteria and the accusations directed towards their families and friends, these girls realized that in order to avoid being on the wrong side of things, it was necessary to support the normal way of Salem village, even if it meant using commonplace fakery tactics. Whatever ripple they belonged in, these girls were urged by the community to explain who was bewitching them. In response, the many fingers pointed to 3 women who were viewed within Salem village as social outcasts. Sarah Good, a bad-tempered beggar, Sarah Osborne, an elderly widow with a scandalous reputation, and Tituba, Samuel Parris's Caribbean-born slave. All three women were arrested and placed in jail. While imprisoned, Tituba denied the accusations. At first. When she did eventually confess, Tituba also admitted that Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were guilty of the same crime. Tituba's confession proved that witchcraft wasn't just being practiced by three social misfits. Rather, it was proof that Salem Village was dealing with an infestation. In order for things to be normal again, Salem Village needed to be combed thoroughly for witches. When people read about the first three accused persons, it makes clear sense as to why they were seen as witches. But when people start looking closely at the other accused people, the more they realize that no one was safe from blame, be they your run-of-the-mill oddballs or your extremely pious churchgoers. Anyone that didn't fit the mold of the normal Puritan way of life was within the accuser's crosshairs. What exactly wasn't normal, you ask? Here's a list. Once the flames were fanned and the accusations spread, kaboom! The mixture in your metaphorical cauldrons thus explodes and creates a situation that will only get messier. If you or anyone around you stood in the way of returning to a conservative, normal Puritan community, I've got 2 words of caution for you. Look out! As the hysteria continued and the jails burst with suspects, it became clear that trials needed to begin ASAP. On May 27, 1692, the governor of Massachusetts, Sir William Phips, set up a court of oyer and terminer, and formal arrest warrants were made the following day. In the trials that took place in the court of oyer and terminer, the principle of innocent until proven guilty that we take for granted wasn't used. If an accused person wound up in the courtroom, they were immediately deemed guilty. 3 kinds of evidence were used in the trials. 1, the confession of the accused. 2, the testimony of eyewitnesses to the accused practicing witchcraft. And 3, spectral evidence. What is spectral evidence, you ask? Spectral evidence is testimony from a witness that the apparition or specter of the accused appeared, tormented, and threatened them. If anyone claimed that they saw a ghost that looked like the accused, that person must be practicing witchcraft. So how did an accused person avoid paying the ultimate price for not being normal enough? Simple. A confession followed by repentance, the implication of other witches and wizards, and a promise to work harder at being normal. Puritans believed that if a person admitted to practicing witchcraft, they should be spared and forced to suffer the consequences of their actions in life and death. Having this knowledge under our belts helps us to see how things quickly spiraled out of control. By the spring of 1693, accusations were spreading outside of Salem village into neighboring locations, and some of the finger-pointing started being directed at powerful people. So what stopped the craze, you may ask? When William Phipps's wife, Mary, was accused, that's what. Hearing this, and knowing full well that Mary wasn't a witch, Phipps suspended the court of Oyer and Terminer and set up a new court, one that denied spectral evidence. The accused who were still alive were given new trials. The bulk of the accused were found innocent. Those that were guilty were issued pardons by Phipps. By the time things simmered down, however, the damage that had been inflicted on Salem village was harsh. 19 people had been executed, 1 person was pressed to death by heavy stones, and many more died in jail. Phipps, obviously embarrassed by his part in the event, ordered all publications about the trials to be burned. Given that the trials had done serious damage to the reputation of Salem village, one can imagine how Phipps must have wanted the situation hushed up as quickly as possible. However, some of the publications did escape the burnings and ensured that the trials had a place in American history. But in spite of the horrors, some good did rise out of the ashes of this tragedy. Salem village was granted independence from Salem town and became what is today Danvers, Massachusetts. Samuel Parris was replaced by Joseph Green, whose sermons became a healing balm to the community. The old conservative normal that brought about the calamity was replaced by a new, open-minded normal. And over the course of the centuries that followed, apologies and exonerations were made. So what lessons can we take away from the Salem witch trials? We can learn about how important due process of law is. We can learn how to tell our imaginary demons and our real demons apart. We can learn how to take responsibility for our actions. We can learn how fear, when combined with ignorance and hate, creates nothing but big, hairy messes that take a long time to clean up. But a crucial thing we can take away from the Salem witch trials is a question we must ask constantly, not only to ourselves, but to others. What exactly is normal enough? Now, I know what you're thinking. M.E., there are so many ways to define normal. We can't pin it down in a single way because it's gray, it's blurry, and it moves around a lot. What does normal look like to you? My viewers, you once again make a very strong point. It's hard to have a set-in-stone meaning of the word. But if you want to know my definition of normal, it is this. Normal is accepting that which is different. That sentence is the biggest lesson that we can learn from the Salem witch trials. What is different in a community is scary, especially if that different is new, unfamiliar, and has the potential to topple an existing power structure. But rather than demonize, shun, and persecute that which is different, we should welcome, accept, and embrace it instead. Only then can we truly better our world and be happier for it. After all, being different is something that is, pun intended, based on the source of the second quote in part 1, incredible. I'm ME from ME and History and YouTube.